Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today as we take a look at NestingWorks and how you can leverage it for design and material optimization in SolidWorks. Today we have our Director of Digital Manufacturing, Lindsay Morrison, taking us through our webinar. But before I pass things over to her to get us started, there are just a couple of quick housekeeping items to mention. First, in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's a question section there. As questions come up throughout the webinar, feel free to type in any thoughts or questions as they come up, and we'll do our best to get to them during our live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If we do run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards, so feel free to keep them coming. Today's webinar will be recorded, so we'll be sending you an email with the recording tomorrow. Feel free to share the recording with anyone on your team who may be interested and maybe weren't able to join us today. If questions do come up after today's webinar, feel free to respond to that email or reach out to your account manager, and we'll definitely put you in touch with Lindsay or somebody else that can help you out with that question. So without further ado, I will pass things over to Lindsay to get us started.
Perfect. Thanks, Jess. So yeah, I'm just basically going to kind of go through our agenda today just to explain kind of what we'll cover. And again, leave your questions in the question area like Jess mentioned, and we can get to those at the end. So again, we're going to cover the NestingWorks today. So basically, I'll go through the NestingWorks add-in, where you can find that, and how basically you can add that in and where it's going to essentially live inside of SolidWorks. So the NestingWorks interface, that's kind of part of that as well. I'll show where all the buttons are and basically how you can kind of work within the NestingWorks world. We'll go through a full sample nest program. I'll show you from start to finish exactly how we would nest that. We'll look at the file folder structure and what's created from that. Some settings and defaults that we can kind of take a look at for the nesting software. So different settings that allow you to control different aspects of the software. Where you can download this, so the download info, and then we'll get to the questions at the very end. Oops, back here. So I'm just going to quickly open my file here. So I've just got a sample desk that I've created inside of SolidWorks. And basically this is an assembly file. So with nesting, we can nest both assembly files as well as part files. So it does not need to be an assembly file in order to nest. So just to start, I did talk about the add-ins. So with SolidWorks add-ins, we can go to Tools, and then add-ins at the bottom here, or we can use the little drop down beside your options, your SolidWorks options, and choose add-ins from here. And basically, once we've got the NestingWorks installed, we're basically just going to check off the check boxes beside these. So the one on the left is going to start that nesting add-in immediately, and the one on the right will start it at startup every time you open SolidWorks. And basically what that add-in is going to do is it's going to add in a new tab inside your command manager. So this is essentially the interface. It's just this tab inside your command manager, and there's just a few buttons that allow you to apply the nest. So I'll go through these different options. So the two buttons on the left-hand side here, Create Nest Job and Nest by Folder. Like I mentioned, for Create Nest Job, it's basically whatever's on your screen. So again, whether it's a part file or whether it's a full assembly file, we can create a nest job for whatever you have open. And the other option, Nest by Folder, allows us to essentially place a whole bunch of different SolidWorks part files that we might want to nest inside of a folder, and then we don't have to open them all up into an assembly file. So this will allow us to just choose the folder, and then we can nest anything that's inside of that folder. Beside those two buttons, there are some different options for unfolding parts. These don't quite often get used. This is mostly for, let's say, for example, if you open up a file that was maybe made in a different type of software. And so again, if you're using, let's say, for example, sheet metal or something inside of SolidWorks, it's automatically going to flatten those parts for you or unfold. Whereas if you did bring maybe certain sheet metal or some kind of part that needs to be unfolded from another software, and it needs help essentially being unfolded, these buttons essentially will help you set those up. There is a settings button that I will go through after we nest this part, just to kind of show you where all of these main settings are and the default options that we can set up. But that's pretty much it. It's very, very quite simple to use and to learn. So this is a nice part about the nesting software. There is no training program. We can obviously set up a time to walk through the software with you. But again, it's very straightforward software to use. So there is no actual training class that comes with the software. So the very first thing that I would normally do is choose the create nest job on the left-hand side because I've got the part open, or the nested assembly. And what that's going to do is it's going to ask me which parts that I actually want to nest. So you can see this is the assembly that I've got selected here. I can actually filter this by specific part types. So native sheet metal, so again, native being inside of SolidWorks or created inside of SolidWorks. Imported, native solids or imported solids. The nice thing about these filters is we can actually filter out specific features. So let's say, for example, you've imported maybe some screws or some bolts or something from a different software. Those can actually be filtered out so that we don't need to select those. So for example, in this actual nest, I want to nest everything except for this post here. So I'm actually going to select everything and then just deselect the post. And you can actually see all the different parts if you click on them. So it'll give you a little preview as to which ones you want and maybe which ones you don't. So this is a really nice window that kind of allows you to select these prior to the nest. Another option would be to suppress whatever you don't want nested prior to nesting. So we'll go ahead and press OK. And that basically adds all of the parts that I want nested inside of my part data tab. So this is the nesting window. Again, it's very simple to kind of use based on the fact that it is just one window. And we're going to start from left-hand side here and work our way over to the options tab. And basically, once we're finished that, we can nest. So in the part data tab, this is kind of where I start. If we are working in an assembly, you can actually see the assembly is the first item in the list here. So if I want multiple quantities of this assembly, if I want to nest maybe 5 or 10, I can actually change this quantity, and it's actually going to change the quantity of each part that's listed inside. So before I do that, I just want to kind of show the different options in here as well for each of the parts. So let's say, for example, if we're looking at this side panel, you can actually see this assembly uses 2 instances of the side panel. It's the exact same part. So it only lists it once in here, and it shows the quantity as 2. So the nice thing is if I multiply this assembly, it's going to also multiply the quantity of the side panel. So if I choose 5 of the assembly, this would be 10 of the side panel, and I'll show you that in a little bit here. Also, we have some different options for each of the parts inside of this window as well. So you'll notice for each part, there is actually a thickness listed. So it will read the thickness directly from the part file, so the SolidWorks part file inside the window. So that is a really nice feature because, again, this is going to actually nest based on the thickness and the material that we specify for each part. So if I have some parts at 20 millimeters thick and then a couple others at 15 millimeters, those will be nested on different sheets according to the thickness. So that's the thickness option here. There's also a quantity option. So like I said, this one's quantity 2. I can manually adjust this as well. So maybe I need a couple extra of this specific part only. I can just come in here and adjust this. We have a grain direction option here. So again, you've got your X, Y, and also a texture direction. So depending on what you want to use for the grain. So that would be associated to the part. And then we also have an option for the grain direction inside the sheet as well. You'll notice that the material is also selected here based on the part itself. So I'm just going to quickly close this to show you the material. So if we look at the part itself, you can see that there is a SolidWorks material that is applied to these parts, and that's where it's actually reading the material. So if we apply a SolidWorks material to the part, that's going to be associated into the nest. Okay, so that's under the part. So the material, you can also see there is a whole bunch of different materials that we can set up as just default materials. And then we can actually manually choose those as well. So if you don't put material settings or material selections, I guess, on your parts, you can also choose those manually. Another option that we do have in the part data tab is the option to choose which side is the normal face. So you can actually see in this case the top face, or the face that's going to be facing up when we place it on the sheet. The arrow is pointing to the direction that that is going to be. So if I didn't want it in this side, I can just easily use the flip option here and flip it from side to side. So whichever one that I want, you can change that normal face. So that's a nice option as well if it's not choosing the correct face for you. There is also the rotation angle here, and this is based on when I do create the nest, how do I want to rotate this part to fit it on the sheet best as possible. So for rectangular parts, I usually just leave this as kind of a 90-degree step angle so that it is able to rotate every 90 degrees. But I don't really choose anything less than that because in most cases, you probably wouldn't want them on any other kind of angle for that. So that is for rectangular parts, but let's say, for example, I had a very complicated shape. Maybe it's in the shape of a C or something like that. And I might want to be able to rotate that every maybe 1 degree. So I can change this value to whatever I want that to be. There is also the option to have a part angle list, so you can add in as many different angles as you want, just separated by a comma. So either option allows you to choose different rotation angles. For this demonstration, I'm just going to use the 90 degrees so that we can show you fairly quickly. But again, if you did use every 1 degree, that's going to give you kind of the most optimal setting because it's going to calculate the nest based on every 1 degree of rotation. So again, each different part, it's going to show you a little preview in the window, and then it's going to show you the information about that part. So we can go through every single part in here. But I'm just going to leave them as is, and then I'm going to just multiply the assembly. So again, like I said, I might want maybe 5 of this assembly. So I'll basically just choose the assembly again, it multiplies that by 5, and then you can see every single part is also multiplied by 5. So it just updates all of the parts. And then I can go on to the sheet data. So if I'm looking at the sheet data tab here, basically what this is going to do is it's going to take the information from the part data and apply a new sheet for each of the parts that we need to nest. So you'll see that the thickness is 20 millimeters and the material is oak. That is because the very first part in here, the thickness is 20 millimeters and the material is oak. So I'm going to need to create a sheet for 20 millimeters oak and 20 millimeters pine in order to fulfill my full nest. You can obviously choose to just do the oak if you wanted to only nest those for now. But again, we're going to do the full assembly here. So I'm going to add in a sheet for the 20 millimeter oak. You'll notice that there is a quantity option here. So the quantity, we want to make sure that it's basically however many sheets that you have in stock for this particular material. Another option, I usually kind of put in a very large number because what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to tell me how many sheets I actually need based on the nest. So if I have the quantity set to 1, for example, and I actually need 3 sheets, it's only going to nest 1 sheet. And then it'll let you know how many parts that you couldn't nest. I would much rather see how many sheets I actually need to nest the whole quantity that I'm looking for. So that's kind of why I leave the quantity a really high number. But again, that's totally up to you as to how you want to set that up. But that's where the quantity comes into play. You'll also see this is where the grain direction is set for the sheet. So you've got your X and Y direction or none. We have the option of choosing an assembly template. So if you do have a specific template that you want this assembly, this nested assembly to open up in, we can choose the template here. So I guess just to mention, basically when we do create the nest, it is going to create an assembly for us with all of the sheets as different configurations. So I'll show you that once we get to the result. We've got also some sheet types here. So there's multiple different ways to create your sheets. The first one would be just standard sheets. So you can see there's a list of different standard sheet sizes. This can be fully customized as well. And I'll show you that once we get into the settings. But again, you can kind of go through and select whichever sheet that you need. We have the option of a custom sheet, so you can type in the values that you want. So again, this is going to be a rectangular size. We have the option of DXF as a sheet. So the nice thing about this is when we create this nested file, if there is any leftover material, we can actually save that out as a DXF or a sketch and use that as the next sheet for our next project. So DXF is sheet or SolidWorks sketch. So in the current assembly, or a SolidWorks sketch from another part or assembly. So a lot of different options in here that allow you to create whichever sheet that you want. I'm just going to use a standard size sheet for now. And again, based on the material, or sorry, the part lengths and thicknesses, you can kind of tell which ones are going to fit on which sheets. So I'll just make sure that it's large enough that all of these parts will fit. So this is just a 7-foot by 6-foot sheet. I'll go ahead and add the sheet to my list here, so my sheet data list. And then you'll see, so as soon as I add in the oak at 20 millimeters, the pine is the next one to be added. So again, I can change whatever this is set to, or I can just go ahead and add that sheet in the same size. If you choose add sheet again, since all of the parts are kind of covered in these two sheets, if I choose add sheet again, it actually warns me and it says the duplicate sheet can't be added, but the quantity can be modified. So I could change the quantity for that oak if I wanted to change it again. So you'll notice I just need these two in order to nest this file. I can remove these sheets and adjust them if I need to. But the next tab in here would be my multi-head option. So this is all based on the machine that you're actually nesting for. If you are using a multi-head machine, let's say there's 8 heads on that machine, we can actually set that up. You would select the machine from your machine list, and it would associate the number of tool heads that are actually with that machine. So you've got your rail direction, the multi-tool head nesting type, we can choose that option, and the actual tool distance between each head. So this is a really nice option if you are using multi-head machines, because it will actually nest based on that as well. So I'm just using, for example, a router in this case with just one head. It's just to show you that option. So I'll just skip over the multi-head options, and then I'll go into my options tab. So this is essentially where we're going to select how we want to nest this. So you can see the part-to-part distance is our first option at the top here. And that allows us to tell the software exactly how far apart we want each of the parts to be from each other. So if I'm using a specific size tool, I might want to use that tool size in here. That I'm cutting between the parts. So again, if you're using a saw blade, if I'm cutting them with a saw, I could put the thickness of that blade. So there's a lot of different variables that we can set up in here. Maybe I want 12 millimeters between each part. And then beside that, or sorry, below that, we have the part to sheet distance. So part to sheet is how far we want the parts from the edge of the actual sheet. So if you want this butted right up against the actual edge of the sheet, I could change this to 0, or I can leave that at 10 millimeters and leave an actual small distance between the edge of the sheet and the parts. In 2020, they actually did add the option of using a variable distance, so we can actually set up different distances from each side of the sheet. So that's brand new in the 2020 version of NestingWorks. We have the option of aligning the part face with the top or bottom of the sheet, or just leaving that as the default. Another option that I really like in this software is the option to generate remnants. So this is actually how we can create remnants for our leftover material in order to be used for the next nest. So you can actually see there's quite a few different types of remnants to be created. And I'll just quickly show you inside the help menu. So every page inside this nesting window, if you choose the help menu in the bottom right hand corner, it actually brings up all of the information from, say, for example, the options tab. We're on the options tab. If I choose generate remnants, this is actually going to give me images as to what I'm changing or what I'm setting up for that remnant. So this is a really nice way to kind of see exactly what you're choosing. So if I'm choosing the type of remnant, you can see there's 4 different options. The first one would be a true shape. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to create a sketch of the outline. So this is true shape. It's just all of the outlines of what's left over. The next one is rectangular, so that's actually what's been selected here, and it's going to create rectangles in the areas that it can from the leftover material. And again, this is creating sketches so that we can use those as the stock material for our next nest. This is a stepped option, so again, rectangular steps. We've got a full clean cut option, so it's just basically going to create wherever we can cut the saw, basically a saw blade right down the side here. So multiple different options, and then again we can create sketches and assembly, or we can create a DXF file of that remnant as well. So quite a few different options with the remnants, but that is a really nice feature that they've added into the NestingWorks software. We have the option of creating a separate assembly file for each sheet. So that will actually allow us to nest and create different assemblies for each sheet. What we normally do with if this isn't checked off is we'll export this into an assembly file, and each sheet will be its own configuration inside the assembly file. So I'll show you that with this example, but again, remember that you can create a separate assembly for each sheet as well, and you can choose the template for that. Another option here would be to save the output as a DXF file. So if you're only looking for a DXF file from this nest, this output option will allow you to save it as a DXF. And once we get into the preview options, we do have multiple different settings that we can change for the DXF. So the layer names and the colors and the lines that we use for that DXF as well. So I'll show you that once we get into the preview. And then we have 2 different nesting types that we can use. So fast nesting and optimal nesting. Fast nesting is what I'm going to use in this case, just to kind of go through because I kind of want the fastest option for us to see it quickly today. But we do also have the optimal nest option here as well, which I would probably use on a regular basis if I was using the software, because again, this is going to give you the most optimal result. So fast nesting gives you the fastest result. Optimal nesting will give you the most optimal nest that we can possibly get from all the settings that we've set up prior. So with optimal nesting, we can also set a time constraint. So if I only have 10 minutes to wait for this, I can get the most optimal nest within 10 minutes. Obviously, the most optimal setting that we can have for the nesting time would be no constraint. So depending on your parts and the actual, so if we come back into the part data, the rotation angle that we've set up for each of these parts, that's going to obviously affect how long it does actually take to create the nest. So if you've got a really strange shaped part and you're rotating every 1 degree, that's going to take quite a bit longer than every 90 degrees with a rectangular shaped part. So you can kind of tell how long it might take based on that. But again, if you are looking at optimal nesting and you've got some really intricate features that you want to rotate around, we can set this to no constraint, you know, go for lunch, come back, and it should be done for you. So again, instead of you having to do that manually, this is obviously the much faster option. So in this case, again, I'll just show the fast nesting. It is a good option as well. But again, if you are using this on a regular basis, I probably would try to stick with more of the optimal nest. So once we've got all of these 4 tabs filled out the way that we want them, we go ahead and choose the preview nest. And what this is going to do is basically going to show us kind of a 2D format of what this nest is going to look like. So if I'm looking at the nesting preview window here, this is my first sheet. You can see each of the sheets are actually located in this drop down at the top. So I can kind of switch between each one. And it'll actually show me what's on each of these sheets in the little part name area here. So I can actually see this is my desktop, and then this is the keyboard pullout that I've got for that part. It shows how many are on each and the rotation angles that were used for each of these. You'll notice that there is an option here for generating a report. So for each sheet, we can actually generate a report. This is basically going to go ahead and create an XML file for me. I can view this on save. I can create a PDF report for this as well. And it's actually going to save this in the folder that I've created the files in. So wherever you created those files, it'll save it right in there. So if I press OK here, it creates that report for me. The report saved, and then it opens that up in that file folder for me. So if I look at, say, for example, the PDF, you can see this is my nest result summary. So it goes through the sheets, explains a little bit about each of those sheets, the thickness, the size, and what's actually nested on them. So that's a nice little feature that we do have for, just close that down, for the preview. So generate report. We do also have what's called the summary of the sheet, which I really like as well. This is kind of similar to the report, but it's just a notepad file. So just a text file that shows the quantity of the parts that were nested on this, you know, the utilization of the sheet, which is also shown here, the sheet thickness and that kind of thing. So I really like the summary as well, and that can also be saved. When we generate the actual assembly, it will create a summary file for the whole project. So it'll show each sheet and then the utilization of the overall assembly as well. We can delete sheets from here as well. You'll see there's different remnant options here, so we can save as sketches or DXF from the preview. And then we also have, like I said, the nested layout DXF options. So again, if I go into the options for the DXF, if I'm going to output this as a DXF file, you'll see that we've got different layer names that we can change. You can turn on and off different exported layers. We can change the line types and the colors of those lines. So lots of different options for the DXF. Because I know quite a few people's machines will just take DXF files, or maybe you have a different CAM software out there that requires a DXF file for your cuts. So this is a really nice option, and we can set that for all layouts as well. Once we're happy with our nest and we're everything looks good on the screen or on our preview here, that's when we can go ahead and generate this nested assembly. So what this is going to do is it's going to take each of those files and it's going to place them into a new assembly file. If we do have CamWorks or SolidWorks CAM that we want to program this with afterwards, this will actually plug all of this information, your sheet sizes as the stock, the parts, everything's kind of ready to be programmed at that point. So it just basically says, do you want to add these to the CamWorks part manager? Yes, I do. So again, if you don't have CamWorks or SolidWorks CAM, you can still use the nesting software. It's just, if you do have them, it makes it a lot easier because they're kind of linked together, and it'll add everything in for you. So the nest result summary, like I said, there is a full summary that is created once you've got the full nest here. So basically it says how many sheets were needed for this nest, the total number of part instances needed, the overall utilization of all of the sheets. And then it also tells me the desired quantity of parts that I wanted, and then the nested parts that we actually got. So again, if you didn't have enough sheets in your quantity for the parts, it would actually show less parts under your nested part quantity because they couldn't all fit on that sheet or something like that. Or maybe the part was too big to fit on the sheet. So it'll actually show you there would be, 8 parts instead of 10 or something like that. So this is a nice little check to show that everything has been nested. And again, it goes through each sheet and shows each one, how many sheets that we need of each of those, the size, and that kind of thing. That can be opened at any time. So in the NestingWorks tab here, you can see the show results summary. That can be opened at any time, and it is actually saved right inside of the folder again. So the folder that you, so this is where all my parts are. It's basically created right inside that folder, so it'll locate that location as well. Also, just a note that report that I created is also created inside of the folder that all of the parts are saved in as well. So just to kind of show the file formats while we're talking about this. So this is our new assembly. So you can see it's just Assemb1. They've created a brand new assembly for us. And inside here, so again, this is our SolidWorks assembly file. You can see all of the parts are placed in here. So there's different instances of each part. These are all fixed. So again, if I try to move these around, it's fixed. I can obviously float that. I can right click and choose float for that particular part and then move it around to wherever I need that to be. Because remember, again, we are in an assembly file. So at this point, you can essentially do whatever you need to do from a SolidWorks assembly. You'll see that the sheet actually shows up as a sketch. So there is the sheet size as a sketch if you do need that for, again, programming purposes or something like that. Every other part in here is actually listed, but they are all suppressed. So the reason why is if we look into our configuration manager, you can actually see that we've got every single sheet listed in here. So we can switch between the configurations. If I go back into my design tree, now these ones are unsuppressed and then these ones would be suppressed. So basically it just creates a configuration for each one of these. If you needed multiple quantities of that, it would again show in the quantity here. So if I needed 2 of this to fulfill my nest, it would show the quantity as 2. My material and my thickness are also in here, which is really nice to be able to leverage. So that's basically what it creates for us, and that is the assembly file. So you do have the option of obviously creating the DXF file. You also have the option of creating a full assembly file. And then we can obviously export this to our CAM software, or again, just switch over into SolidWorks CAM and start programming from here. So another thing that I did want to talk about is I'm just going to save this. So save as. Again, I can place this right into my folder with all of my parts, and I can call this nested assembly. Save that. Again, if you do make any changes to any of these parts, maybe you move a hole to a different location on that board, it's automatically going to update in this assembly as well, because again, it's using all of the same part files. So it's all linked together, which is really nice. If I close that nested assembly and open up my regular assembly again, if I go back into create nest job, All of my different settings will be saved in here. So I would have to save this as well. But again, you can kind of, so this one isn't, but if I did save this prior to, it would save all of my settings in there. So I could go back in and adjust that, but I can go back in and nest it again. So if I needed to make any changes. But what I did want to cover was under my settings window here. So inside the settings in NestingWorks, we have the option of creating a whole bunch of different defaults that we can set up for our parts as well. So if you don't want to have to go through the same nesting settings each time, you're always going to use, the same part-to-part distance, we can actually save those as default settings. So depending on the units that we're working in, we can change those. The part quantity, so again, we can adjust the actual part quantity. If you're always creating 5 of every part, we can actually save that in here as a default. The rotation type, are we using step angle? If we are using step angle, what is that angle that we want as a default? You've also got your part angle list, grain directions. Again, a lot of different checkboxes that we can turn on and off for different aspects of this. So show assembly quantity, reverse reference face direction, so just turning those on and off. The nesting option defaults at the bottom here. So again, this is under your options window inside of the nesting. If we want to nest part in part, so this actually allows us to place the part inside of maybe a hole in a different part, we can turn that on. Starting corner for nest, so where do we want to start placing the parts? You'll notice they all kind of start from the lower left-hand corner and spread out onto the page from there, or sorry, onto the sheet from there. But we could start in the upper right-hand corner, wherever we need to start that nest. If we go down into the next setting here, we have materials. So this was that default materials list. If you use the drop down inside your part settings, we can obviously use the materials list that's listed in here, but you can also create new materials or update the list with other materials. So this allows you to kind of create your own material list. Same with the machine. So again, if you are using multi-head machines, this allows you to create different machines within this list and adjust those based on the heads that are used for that specific machine. And last but not least, the standard sheet sizes. So that drop down when we went into the sheet window that allowed us to choose the standard sheet size. We can actually go ahead and create new sheets or update the existing sheets that are listed in here. So lots of different default settings that we can change and adjust for the software. And that allows us to obviously make things even faster the next time we go to nest. So I just wanted to kind of show, again, there are some different settings behind the scenes that can be set up for that. So the next thing that I want to cover before we get into the questions is the download information. So where do we go to download this? So it's just camworks.com. So where we would go to download any of the CamWorks products. NestingWorks is created by HCL, which is the CamWorks. And basically we would just go to the support page to the customer area. You would sign in from here. So again, if you don't have a login, we can get you one or set you up with that. So let us know. And then basically in here, you can see that there's a NestingWorks download. So obviously CamWorks is above that, but there is the NestingWorks download page, and this will actually allow you to download directly from here. So this is the newest 2020 release, and that just came out. So that is available in there. Again, if you are using SolidWorks 2019, you can install a version ahead. So I could install NestingWorks 2020 on 2019 as well. So one version ahead and one version behind for those. So that's the download info on NestingWorks. If you are looking for more information about the NestingWorks software, once you have this actually installed, there is a list of tutorials that does come for free with the software as well. So that's just in the tutorials section under your help menu. And that will allow you to change configuration files, your installation guide, the license activation if you do purchase it. And then you've got user guides and tutorials as well, so you can actually go through some tutorials on how to use the actual nesting software in here for free. So yeah, that's the NestingWorks software. It's fairly simple to learn and simple to use. So I definitely recommend giving it a try. Let us know if you do have any more questions about that. But yeah, I think I'm done, Jess, if you want to take
Perfect.
over.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So we do have quite a few questions here. It looks like it'll likely be more than we have time to address in this session. So we'll get through as many as we can. But if we don't get to yours, we definitely will follow up with you after today's webinar to get you those answers. So the first question that we've got for you, Lindsay, is can you nest parts inside of other parts?
Yes, for sure. So I kind of went through this inside the settings window here, just touched on it, but that's essentially this part in part option. So if you've got a part that has a large opening or a large hole or a large cutout inside the center, and you've got some smaller parts that you want nested inside of there, that little checkbox will essentially allow you to nest those parts right inside of the other parts. So this is obviously going to save you a lot of space on that sheet and allow you to nest those parts inside of the others.
Okay, great. Next up, we have, can you export the nested part directly to a DWG file, or does it have to be made into a SolidWorks assembly?
So you definitely can. So that's the nice thing about this software too, is if you don't have the CAM software, or if you don't need the CAM software and all you're looking to do is essentially export this as a DXF or DWG file, you can easily do that right within the nesting window. So once I create my nest with all of my parts, that's just under the options tab here, and the save output as DXF. So once this is selected and we preview the nest, it's actually going to create that DXF file for me based on the options that I choose in the preview window. And then you can just close it down. So you don't even need to create the SolidWorks assembly file from it. It'll create that DXF file automatically. And then obviously we can save that as a DWG, or sorry, open it as a DWG to manipulate that in whatever software we need to. But yeah, basically it's just a little checkbox here. You press preview nest. It opens up into that preview window. And then we would choose a save as from here. Then you can just, again, press cancel and get out of the nesting. So you don't even need to create that nested assembly if you don't need to. And it'll create the DWG or DXF file directly from this, this view. So that's a really nice option for the people that don't essentially need any kind of CAM software afterwards, or they have something that programs directly from a DXF file.
All right, great. Third question for you, can you create tabs on your parts?
Yes, so that is actually not done in the nesting software. That would be done in the CAM software. So especially for SolidWorks CAM and CAMWorks, that is something that was just added in. It's a brand new feature in SolidWorks CAM and CAMWorks 2020. So basically with your contour tool paths, we can go ahead and add in tabs. So I'll just quickly open up my nested assembly here just to quickly show you the options that we have for that. So if you are looking to create, just add some tool paths to create the tabs, just double check. Yeah, so I just need to add in my part perimeter. Oh, sorry, not on the right sheet. Let me go back to my layout one. There we go. And then basically, if I just generate this one, a contour tool path. And go into my contour settings for this particular feature. So again, it's basically gone through and added the contour tool path around the part. And inside of my contour tab, if you are using SolidWorks CAM or CamWorks, there is the option now for tab cutting. So this is again in SolidWorks CAM or CamWorks 2020, and that can be added in for any contour tool path. So basically, what is the feature that you're looking to apply this to? We can apply this to all. What is the length and the thickness of the tab? So it allows us to add in the actual dimensions of that tab. How many tabs do we need for this particular feature? Again, you can customize the actual tab, so we can offset tabs based on where they're located. So you can actually see the little previews. Multiple lead-in point options. So again, lots of different features inside of this option, but it's brand new for 2020, so I definitely recommend checking that out. And this is something people have been asking for a while with NestingWorks and with the CAM software. But yeah, it's just been added in 2020, so we can take use of or make use of the tab option. So if I preview that, you should actually see the small tabs. And there's a whole bunch of depth cuts in here right now, but we should, I'm just going to change this to one depth cut so that we can see this a little bit better. What is the depth of this part? It's 20 millimeters. So if I change my first cut and my max to 20 millimeters and preview that, I should have just a one depth cut. And then we can locate where the tab is right here. You can actually see it actually does a retract move here and then comes back in. So that's essentially where that tab would be. And again, we can change the dimensions of that tab as well. And again, there's 2 on this one because that's what I had the settings for, but we can change that and we can offset to wherever we want those to be as well. Yeah, so that's brand new in 2020. And yeah, definitely recommend updating if you do have SolidWorks CAM or CamWorks because it's a great new feature.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lindsay. We are just out of time now. There are a few questions remaining, so we will definitely circle back with you guys after the webinar is finished today. That being said, if any more questions do come up, feel free to reach out at any time. You can always reach us at info@cadmicro.com or reach out to your account manager, and we can put you in touch with Lindsay or anybody else on our team to help you with those questions. So that's it for today. Lindsay, thank you so much for a great presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us on your Wednesday afternoon. We'll let you get back to it, but we hope to see you again soon. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.